Welcome to the Holly Furtick YouTube channel. I wanted to give you a little sneak peek at something that we're doing at Elevation. It's a new mini-series with our small groups called Highlights, where I get together with a friend to discuss my husband's sermon from that week. We will talk in depth about our favorite highlights and discuss practical ways that we can apply them to our lives. Now, if you haven't seen the sermon from this week, go watch that on the Elevation Church YouTube channel. I'll put the link for you below so that you find the right one. Then come back here. For now, here's this week's highlights. One of my favorite things that we do at Elevation is gather people together to discuss the amazing sermons that we get to hear from our pastor every single week. I know I'm his wife, but I am continually blown away at how he is able to see the Bible and then challenge us every single week with the things that God is showing him. And this week is no exception. So last week, Pastor Stephen talked about think like a reaper. And he told us feelings come, but they don't come first. This week, he brought us a sermon called This is What a Miracle Feels Like. And he talked about how, I love this quote from my notes. He said, if you don't know what faith feels like, you can have it and not even realize it. And that is sort of what just encompassed this entire message. And today I have with me our e-group's pastor, Britt Akinsola. Hello.
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
All right, start us off, Britt. What were you feeling? What were you thinking?
I mean, he hit on so many things. Also, just overarchingly, I felt like it was a very maybe healing message is what I would go with. But he shared from Acts. I actually, if it's okay, I want to do one of the scriptures that he taught from. Okay.
Love it.
So let's go to Acts 12, verse 17. We have it right here. It says, Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet and described how the Lord had brought him out of prison. And for me, when he shared this scripture specifically, the part where he said how the Lord had brought him out of prison is what stuck out to me. He opened up the sermon talking about Jonah. Do you remember that? He had mentioned him, and I don't know if you know this or not, but that's my favorite book in the Bible.
Jonah?
Jonah.
Okay.
It really is. So when he said that, I immediately was like, oh, something in here is just for me, because people don't just talk about Jonah.
Yeah, right.
Right. But the thing that I loved is that how I wrote it down is Pastor said, I wouldn't have thought he would have brought me out like this because he was sleeping. Yeah. Right. And when you think about Jonah was in the belly of a fish. And this is going to sound really gross. Sorry if you guys have snacks and stuff at group, but Jonah was vomited up right back where he was supposed to be. And, Jesus was resurrected.
Yes.
That's, and so I was thinking about all of the moments in my life and, how I was brought out of maybe a prison in my life. And it's so easy to miss some of the times that we've actually been delivered from spaces because it doesn't look like what we thought it would. Exactly.
It never does.
It's usually messier than we think. Yep. Or when Pastor was talking about sneaking, or God can be so sneaky sometimes and he's working, but I'm missing it.
Yeah.
And so I love that he brought that, and that nod of Jonah was just for me. We always say, what's that thing for you that just for you in the sermon? That was it for me.
Can we also talk about how brilliant it was when Pastor Stephen, he read the whole passage on that amazing screen, He read the whole passage, he took us to the bottom, and then to that last verse where Peter said, now I'm going to tell you. And then he backed it up and we went back through the sermon, through the story. And I was just man, he is such a brilliant communicator in just the way he makes the scripture come alive, and you're not just reading verse 1, 2, 3, 4, but just the way he makes it all come alive. Okay, so there were 3 just solid points, and I really want us to try and touch on all 3 today because I want you to be able to touch on it in your group. So Renette is going to kick us off, and she this is what she sent in to us. This is her quote. She said, "I've realized I can be in a miracle and not feel it. This message was a reminder that when I've done all I can do, I need to sleep on it. I'm going to need my rest." And I totally agree with you.
1000%.
I mean, that was such an incredible point. The first one was sleep. And so this is the quote that we pulled from the sermon. When you've done all you can do, sleep on it. And I loved how I wrote down when I wrote sleep on it, and then I wrote in parentheses, the stuff you can't control. And I feel like there's so many times in my life where I will be worried about a situation, about a person that I love, or, if a situation is going to work out in the way that I'm really hoping that it does.
Yeah.
And sometimes there are things in our life that we can control, but sometimes there are things in our lives that we can't control. And those are the things that we have to sleep on it.
Yes.
And it's so hard to do that.
It is so difficult. I flashback to, first of all, marriage, right? Like you can't control your spouse.
Right.
I have a child, a kindergartner now. I cannot control him. And there are truly times where I need to do all I can do. And then this is hard for me though, because it's not my personality type to just sleep on it.
Yeah.
And so I like to be I can handle this, strong, independent woman.
Yeah.
I got this.
Yeah.
But there are times where I can think back to where I'm like, oh, I got to the end of me.
Yeah.
And I really needed to sleep on it and let God do what only God can do.
Because I think there's a point, there's like a crossover point where it goes from I'm no longer really praying about this. I'm becoming anxious about it.
You're right.
And so, yes, it's important to take the people that we love and pray for them. And it's important to talk to them and to take opportunities to be there for them, right? But there have been times in my life where I felt like God has just whispered into my spirit, this is not your fight. And you just get to a place where you're like, okay, God, I'm going to release this into your hands.
Yeah.
And that's when that supernatural peace comes. What did Pastor Stephen say about peace? No comfort, no certainty, but a supernatural peace. And that's what Peter had in that prison.
How beautiful to think that you can be resting and God will be working on your behalf. How did Pastor put it? He was talking about how when he was sleeping, God, the angel was there unshackling him while he was resting.
While he was sleeping,
So he had the energy he needed for when he woke up to stay on track with God's purpose.
Yeah. Here's a quote from Dustin. He said, the sermon made me think about all the times when my mom prayed for me over the years. And I think that all of her late night prayers for her son are what helped me be able to get through the hard times, back to church, and now leading others in our ministry. And I think that's such an encouragement for everybody out there that you have someone in your life that you're believing that God is going to do something in their life. And you just pray with patience. Look at Dustin.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so thankful for Dustin's mom and the miracle that God has done in his life.
Well, she was praying, he was sleeping.
All right. So the second one was struck. Now, I think this point was probably my favorite.
Okay.
And here's what Pastor Stephen said. Sometimes a miracle feels like being struck. And it makes me think of, there was a really cool thing that he said. He said, angels' wings can cover and they can correct.
Yep.
And he talked about how sometimes it's not, we think it's an attack from the enemy, but because it feels like being struck.
Yep.
But really, it's not an attack. It's God doing something in your life. It's God saying, hey, don't go this way, or this is not what you should be doing. And I sometimes, what this point really made me think about was, have you ever had someone who left your life and you were sad about it? And I can think about, just in my context at our ministry at Elevation, there have been so many amazing people that have come and they've been a part of our staff, and sometimes people leave. God has something else for them, and that doesn't discount the time and that they were with us. But that also doesn't mean that it's not painful when people leave. And I can think of a handful of times where people left and I felt like they were leaving a hole in my life. And I felt like, how was I gonna be able to move forward in this task or this project or this aspect of our ministry without this person? And it's funny because, hindsight is always 20/20. It feels painful at the time. It almost feels like, I don't know if you've ever felt this way, but where you want to tell the person like, no, this is not God's will for you. And, and the Holy Spirit is not speaking to me in the same. But when I look back, I realized that there were occasionally people that God had to remove from my life so that I would move forward. I had to move forward without them. And it could be in your job. It could be in your relationships, maybe somebody that is not going to be going on the same path that you're going on. And sometimes it's painful when God removes something from your life. But when you look back, you realize, oh, that wasn't an attack. That was actually the hand of God waking me up and saying, let's go. This is where we're headed.
You're right, Pastor Holly. I immediately thought of, I wasn't always with the JT Akinsola. You had to go through some things to get to that. And and God bless them, I pray they're doing well. But I know the track that, looking back only do I know this, but the track that we were on, dating-wise, if God hadn't removed it, like I don't know where I would be. I certainly wasn't in church, okay? So, but I'm grateful that, God did a miracle through that. Because, as someone not raised in church and that was in really toxic relationships, it really is a miracle that I can sit here and be like, I love church. I'm here. God's gotten a hold of my life. And I'm in a healthy marriage, married to a really good man. And it's not all about that, but that's just a small example, of how God did exactly what we're saying. Like he had to strike me. And I didn't know how I was even going to get through that loss.
It's so painful at the time, but you realize that sometimes God has to remove something or someone or, I think about somebody who maybe has lost their job and it feels so painful and it feels so like exposing because you're like, did I do something wrong? And
just the striking,
I didn't see this coming. It can sometimes come, like Peter was sleeping and then the angel struck him. And so a lot of times you don't see it coming, but really when you are able to look back, you can go, oh, I see God's hand in that painful experience.
As you were talking, I just thought about like how sometimes, when you're sleeping, you're very stagnant. And it does take that little bit of a jolt to get you moving again because he would have stayed in prison had he stayed asleep. And so it doesn't always feel good, but like it is necessary.
All right, we have a video clip from Zachary at our Lake Norman campus, and he's kind of talking about this too.
My highlight from today's sermon is you're not going to get tackled if you're not carrying the ball. I really like that one a lot because I'm super into football, and it just reminded me that when I'm going through some trials, it's because something good is going on in my life.
I mean, I love it. Great. I love the football illustration, even though I've never played football. I get it, Like,
it's true, because you're not tackling the person without the ball, without something valuable in their hands.
Exactly. There was something that I
do know that. I do know that. Holly.
Okay, so Pastor Stephen was talking about how Peter was in prison because of his purpose. And he said sometimes the prison proves your progress. And it can be so hard when you're in that position and you're like, oh, it's the enemy, he's attacking me. But no, it's like you have the ball, you're making progress. Of course, there's going to be resistance and opposition on your life. And it can feel confusing. And that's why I loved how Pastor Stephen opened up with this idea. If you don't know what faith feels like, you can have it and not realize it. And I think that leads us to the third point, which was stumble, because sometimes faith feels like a stumble. He says you can stumble and still walk straight. And
so good.
Man, this was probably the most comforting part of the message, right?
Like you don't got to be perfect, right? You just have to keep moving forward. And so that was just so helpful because Lord knows, and my parenting in my job, and anything, I'm like, sometimes you just really don't know. Right? But you just have to keep trying. It's such a helpful reminder just not to give up. And what an interesting concept, right? Because I don't want to speak for you, but for me, my natural inclination, if it's difficult, if there's resistance, it must not be it.
Yeah, right.
That's what our brains tell
Or
us.
I must not be doing it right.
Yeah. Or I'm wrong. I'm on the wrong track.
Yeah.
Or this must not be what God has for me. I thought he gave me this dream. I thought he promised me this, but because I can't obtain it or it's too difficult to reach right now.
Or because it's not easy.
Oof.
Yeah.
That one.
I know. I just thought this was such a comforting idea to know. Okay, it made me think of this term that my boys taught me. Have you ever heard of the ugly dub?
Please teach us.
So the ugly dub is just it's a W. It's a win, right? Like a W is a W.
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the season, there's going to be a number in front of the W and a number in front of the L. And
so good.
And so that has really helped me in my life when I'm like, okay, you know, like I didn't do that perfectly, but I still ended up in the right space at the end. And
That's so
and I
good.
can learn from it. Like you can learn from your stumble.
Yep.
But in the end, it's still a W.
That's so good. You or
Doesn't have to be
Pastor
pretty.
Steven should preach that one day.
Well, I think he just did. I loved how he said, a miracle feels like shaky legs.
Yeah.
And then I also love this part. He said, it's going to be his light and my legs.
So good. So good. I mean, this is why I say it was so healing.
Yeah.
Because when I'm looking at it, you know, like sleeping, like what permission to let God be God in your life. You know, I'm like struck, like, okay, wait, this is for like my betterment, not to harm me. Because I know my Bible tells me that.
Yeah.
But how easily we forget it. And then like whenever we get to this last point right here, stumble, like it doesn't, you remember Pastor preached ugly trust?
Yes.
Yeah. You
That's
know,
one of my favorite messages he ever preached.
It doesn't have to be perfect.
It doesn't
You just
have to be
keep
pretty.
moving.
Yeah.
I hope that was helpful for you. It's so important to talk about what God is speaking to you, to let the seed of His Word get planted in the soil of your heart. If you want to hear the full conversation and participate as well, join an Elevation E-group. We have groups that meet in person and online, literally all over the world, and we would love to have you. To learn more, go to elevationchurch.cc and comment below. Let me know what some of your highlights were from this week's message. Thanks for joining me. Make sure you like and subscribe so that you'll get notified when next week's sermon discussion is available, and I'll see you back here next week.